Hey guys, welcome back to Chaos Core Tech. My name's Garrett, and today we are going to be looking at how to use modifiers in Blender. Now, this is actually part 3 to a beginner's guide to Blender, geared specifically for 3D printing, although this will get your feet off the ground in Blender regardless. So if you are interested, I will put an eye up in the corner where you can look at the first 2 videos where I talk about the basics of basically just moving your mesh around and inserting edge loops, extruding, insetting, that type of thing. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. And modifiers in Blender are pretty intuitive with an asterisk. That asterisk being once you've kind of settled into how modifiers work, then it becomes very easy, but there's kind of a hurdle there. I've found for a lot of beginners, and I remember my first time learning Blender, it was something that took me a little bit to wrap my head around, but now it's second nature, and there are certain things that are just impossible to do without modifiers. So to begin with, let's just start with the default Blender cube. I'm going to go ahead and delete the light and the camera because I don't need those, so I'm just left with the default cube. And we don't even really need an interesting mesh to start messing around with modifiers. This cube will get us a lot of what we need, so let's jump right in. And you'll have this panel over on the right side that has all of these little icons, and the only one we really need to concern ourselves with here is the one that looks like a wrench. And it's blue on mine. I'm not sure if the colors are consistent, but if you hover over it, it'll say modifier properties. So go ahead and click on that, and you can see that we can add a modifier. Now, this is per object, so you do need to have a selected object, and if you have more than one objects, for example, it will only apply to which one you have selected. And even if you have nothing selected, if you look over here in the hierarchy, you can see that the first cube that you had selected last is still technically the one that's selected, and you can see the name right here is cube. So if I click on this one, click off, I have nothing selected, but it is still operating on that secondary cube there. So I'm going to delete that, don't need it. I'm going to click on this cube so we have it selected, and I am in object mode. If I click on this little drop down, you will be greeted with an enormous list of a bunch of complicated sounding words. But the ones that I'm going to focus on today are in this generate column. And I would say that this is 99% of what I use ever. I have occasionally used some of these other things. The physics ones are pretty fun. But to start with, just use these generate ones. They are the simplest and kind of do the most straightforward things. If you're trying to do something specific, I would look up other tutorials on how to do these other things. So now I'm going to try to explain what a modifier is. Like I said, it's kind of confusing, but we have this mesh here, right? That if I go into edit mode, we can see it's consistent of points, lines, and faces. So this is all of the data that the object has. And I can move these around and do other things, but ultimately this object is just made of these points and edges and faces. So if I add a modifier, it basically takes it away from the editing process and adds another layer on top of it. So it's a process that happens outside of you actually editing the data of the object. And I'm sure that sounds really confusing and stupid, so let me just show you what it means. So if I go to modifier, I'm just going to add a bevel modifier. And you can see immediately it bevels all of the edges. So now if I go into edit mode, you will see that the bounds of the box are kind of outside of the actual rendered box. So this illustrates nicely what it's actually doing. So it's beveled all of the edges, but the underlying mesh is still the same. So if I go in and move this right here, the bevel moves along with it, and I don't have to worry about we're managing all of the extra vertices that come with doing something like this. I can just really do whatever I need to do. And I can come back in, I can do all the things we talked about before, like insetting, extruding up, and the bevel modifier will just work itself out with whatever mesh you put on there. And if you accidentally put on a modifier that you no longer want, you can click this little X. This whole panel right here is just called the modifier stack. So you can click this little X and it will no longer be there. I'm going to Control Z so it is back again. And you can see that over here, there are just a bunch of options that each modifier has. So these options are specific to the Bevel Modifier. Right now it is on edges, but you can do vertices. So this one, it just sort of flattens out all of where all the vertices are. So if that's something specific you want, you can do that. There's different types. If I want more of a bevel, I can change this amount here by just clicking and dragging. And you can see the bevel increases or decreases. You have to be careful because Blender will kind of let you go too far sometimes. And you can see that they start overlapping. This one does stop you, but still some weird things will happen at that boundary. So be aware that, you know, you can kind of push these things too far. Another thing that's kind of cool is that you can change the segments in the bevel. So like right now, you can see that it is just a completely flat bevel. Here, let me go back to a cube just so we can visualize this a bit better. So this is what the cube looks like. Now we've got these flat edges. If I go to front view, you can see that it just took the edges and cut them. So, but what if I wanted more of a rounded edge instead of a flat edge? I can just increase these segments, and once again, you can use these arrows to click up and down. You can click and drag, or you can click on here and actually type a number. Like if I type 10, you will see that we've got 10 segments and it rounds it instead of just being flat. So as I go up through them, or down through them, sorry, you'll just see that it gets more round. And if I keep going to like say 32, you'll see that it is very, very smooth and you can hardly see any of the vertices there. But ultimately, we still just have a cube with 6 faces. So I can still grab one of these points, move it around, and this is where it starts to be very powerful, because if I had this many faces and all of them were vertices, you know, you'd be working with a ton of data and it'd be hard to move around. And once again, we can extrude, go up, extrude, and you can see that it just gives you nice bevels. Some things do get kind of weird, but you know, you just kind of have to look at what your mesh is doing and decide what you want to do based on that. So there are a bunch of properties down here, and the nice thing is with Blender, you can really just mess with these and see what they do. There's also documentation online, and if you hover over it, it does a pretty good job of telling you what each of these things does. Now, say that we're happy with the shape and we want to move forward, we actually do need to convert it into real vertices, real lines, real data on the object. If you export it just like this, it will automatically apply the modifiers for you. So Blender kind of looks out for you in those situations. But say that you need to edit it beyond this, but you need those vertices to be there, you can apply the modifier. And this little arrow right here next to these computer monitor and camera icons, next to the X as well, you can click this little drop down and apply. Now, something to keep in mind is you do have to be in object mode to apply. If I go back into edit mode, it will not let me apply. So you do need to be in object mode, but just tab out into object mode, click apply, and you'll see that the modifier goes away because there is no longer a modifier on there. But if I tab into edit mode now, you'll see that all of these have actually converted into mesh data, and I can select each one of these individually and do weird things with them. You know, now I can inset this, do weird things, and not have the bevel apply anymore. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of online classes covering all sorts of different topics. There's a premium membership that gives you full access to the classes, so if you're trying to pick up a new creative skill, Skillshare can help you with all of the skills you want to learn. It's a great place to fuel your creativity and point you in the right direction. For example, I've really been wanting to sharpen my drawing abilities lately, and something that's crucial for both 2D drawing and 3D modeling is knowing anatomy. Luckily, Jazza has a new series called the 28-Day Drawing Challenge Anatomy for Illustration in Comics. He's really good at breaking things down and demonstrating how to apply these ideas to your work. Also, I know that a lot of people with 3D printers want to learn how to 3D model, and there are a ton of 3D modeling courses for a wide variety of programs like Blender, Maya, ZBrush, and even CAD programs. So whether you're trying to learn something new or improve your knowledge on an existing skill, Skillshare is an extremely useful tool. It's curated specifically for learning, meaning there are no ads, and they're always launching new premium classes so you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. The first 1,000 people to click the link in the description below or use the code ChaosCoreTech will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so you can explore your creativity. Thank you, Skillshare, for sponsoring this video. But let's talk about the real power of modifiers, and that is that we can use multiple of them. So if I want, I can add another bevel. Like if I change this back down to one segment, I could add another bevel modifier on top of it, and you'll see that it is beveling the edges of the first bevel. And you can't really see it here, it kind of just looks like we went up a segment, but if I increase the amount of the first one, you'll start to see that it's really just beveling the edges after the first one. So it reads it from top to bottom, so this top modifier is going to be the one that is applied first, and then this is applied after it. And if I tab into edit mode, you'll see that it is still just that same mesh we were working on. I can still mess with it, but it's now got two bevel modifiers on it. And they don't both have to be bevel modifiers. I can click that, so back down to one, and I can do a subdivision modifier. And a subdivision modifier basically just takes every vertex that you have and divides it into 4. This is really easy to show on a cube, so let me add a cube. I'll move it over here just so we have some room, and if I tab in, you can see that it just has all 6 faces. So if I go to add a modifier, subdivision surface, you'll see that it kind of turns into a ball, and you may be wondering why that happens, but I can actually make it a little more obvious. And if I tab into edit mode, we can still see that the cube is just there. If I click on simple on the modifier, it will not round the edges. So it actually won't look any different, and even in edit mode, it's not really different until I move things. But if I were to apply this modifier, tab out into edit mode, apply, now tab into edit mode, you'll see that it has basically just loop cut this a couple times, and it just turned this one face into 4 smaller faces, equal faces. And we can increase this viewport levels. They have 2 different options here. It's pretty straightforward. Just this levels viewport is what we're looking at right now, and renders are what will be rendered out. And if I increase the levels here just so you can see what I'm talking about, it just adds more subdivisions. Be careful with this. You can bog your computer down quite a bit because it is multiplying by 4 every time, so the numbers get big very quickly. Most of the time I'm working with 2 to 5 subdivision levels. I rarely ever get higher than that. And the reason they have a different option for render is, say that you're working like on a Pixar movie. Their characters are very, very smooth in the movies. When they render them out, you don't see any of the polygons. But it's very hard to work on characters like that because even our best computers, it's just they can't handle moving those things around at runtime, so they move around simplified versions of them in the viewport. They would have like 2 to 3 subdivision levels, but when they render they might have like up to 10 subdivision levels, because then they can just let the computer churn while it's rendering. So long story short, don't worry about the render thing. Now, if you want to see this outside mesh conform to the inside of this a little bit better, you can click this button right here that just looks like an upside down triangle with vertices on it, and it will conform the structure of the object to the actual mesh. Now, keep in mind that things can get weird by doing this, because this is still technically a cube. So if I take this one point here and grab it, you'll see that it kind of behaves weirdly. Like, this isn't really what the cube's doing. So you might want to turn that off, and then you can see what the cube is doing. Also, keep in mind that when you subdivide things and round them out, they do get smaller. And as you increase the subdivision count, you'll just see that it just basically introduces more on the inside and rounds it out even further. So say that we wanted this to not necessarily be spherical, but more like a rounded cube, sort similar to what the bevel does. We can actually insert an edge loop and see that it will make it a little more barrel-like. And if I keep adding subdivision cuts, because now instead of cutting from this side to this side and rounding it out, we're now cutting from here to here and rounding it out. And if I click this button to put it on the mesh, you can see a little bit better. So now from this line to this line, it's perfectly flat. And now, because they're on the same plane, but these two are not, so it rounds from there to there. And if I want this to be smoother, I can just click these levels up, and now I have this weird rounded pill thing. And now back to this original one. I put the subdivision surface on there. So now I can click this up and it gets smoother. And even though this looks like a very complicated mesh now, because there's a lot of vertices, it's very smooth, if I tab into edit mode, you'll see that I still just have this basic mesh, and I can still just manipulate it however I want to. So if I inset this and extrude out, and once again, you do kind of get some weird effects, but you just kind of mess with things and you'll learn how to use these things to your advantage. Another thing we want to keep in mind is the order in which to apply them. So it, like I said, it reads from top to bottom, so it does bevel first, then subdivision. So if we are going to apply these manually, we need to do it in the same order. We start with the bevel and move our way down, and let me show you why. If I apply the subdivision first, the object will change. So I'll click apply, and you can see that now things are behaving a little more weirdly because the bevel modifier is still there, but now it has all of this data to work with. And that is not what we want. So let me undo. And now I'm going to apply the bevel modifier first. Apply, and see the object does not change, even though the subdivision one is still there and bevel is not. So if I tab into this, you can now see that the bevels were applied. This is what the mesh looks like without the subdivision surface. So I'll turn this back on, and now we can tab out into edit mode and apply this, and tab into edit mode, and now you'll see we have all of these vertices. But this is a complete mesh at this point. Hey guys, I'm going to interrupt myself here. This video ended up being way too long, so I'm going to stop it here and make a part 2 that will be the very next video that I release will be the part 2 to this one, explaining more modifiers, and we'll actually go into how to Boolean things as well. If you're looking for things just to mess with and get better at, go in and just mess with some of the modifiers, apply them, see the different things that they do. If you're curious about one, just look it up. There's a ton of great information out there. And then also let me know down in the comments if there's anything specific you have a question on that I can address in the next video. Just your thoughts in general. So thank you for watching. A huge thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. And until next time, keep creating.